Welcome back, all of you. My name is Jort, and I have the pleasure to introduce Bert to you. Bert Fabry is one of our seasoned project managers, analysts, and also Agile coaches. Bert is currently even in the middle of a huge Agile transformation. Some in the room might know a little more about it. Bert is going to tell us more about how to optimize Agile success and also adoption, because that's a huge success factor also. So, Bert, floor is yours.
Okay, so can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So welcome everyone, and I'm glad to see so many of you present here for this presentation that originally had a bit more of a controversial title, Why Agile Fails. We scrapped that because we wanted to focus on the solutions for you as a customer. So, as Jort has already said, I'm a PM, and I've been in IT for somewhat over 20 years, and I've been involved in both classic waterfall, in true Agile, but also in like water, scrum, fall kind of projects. Seen from the reaction of some of you, I would surmise that you know what I'm talking about. And if you want to learn more about that, there is an interesting session later this afternoon from my colleague David, who will talk about turnkey projects, where he tries to blend the Agile approach and classic waterfall fixed price kind of projects. So if you're interested, join his session. So one of the things I wanted to discuss with you today are the ideas, or some of the ideas from Mike Kottmeyer from Leading Agile, who stipulated those ideas in 2014, 2015, but he has recently updated that in a new white paper. So if you're interested in learning more, either talk to me or you can also read the white paper. So where do I want to start? So, as my colleagues Peter and Wouter already told in the previous session, for those of you who were present, somewhere along the line Agile started. That's in 2001. Some group of people came together somewhere in the mountains in Utah, and they tried to distill a common denominator amongst the different kind of approaches and methodologies that were present at that time. So we had like Lean that was up there, Crystal, XP, and so forth. So, but in 2001, it all like blended into the Agile Manifesto. I'm not going to go into details. I wanted only to say that the Agile Manifesto had 4 core values, 12 guiding principles, and that it was really something that was meant to be used by small teams, 6 to 8 people sitting together with a customer and producing something, a product, on an incremental basis. So what was the end result? What the end result should have been or should be is business value. Now, that's a theory, but what do we see in practice? What do we see in companies is when we start to use or when we start to implement the principles and the values of the Agile Manifesto, that it doesn't lead immediately to business value. So why does it fail? Why does the Agile Manifesto come up short? So let me be clear about something, is that I don't think that the Agile Manifesto is not important. It's really important, but it's like missing something. It's not telling the entire story. And for a moment, I want you all to envision like a conversation you had with an Agile practitioner or an Agile coach, or if you haven't had the opportunity, then perhaps you've read something, a paper, an article, or a book on Agile. So if you've got that thing in mind, I would surmise that you can place the tone of the article or the conversation into one of two categories. So on the one hand, I'm going to go into a real extreme here, is that you have the belief system of Agile, the values behind the manifesto, and then you have people at one time really starting to evangelize it. They really start to go really deep into the principles and start to get really, really rigid about it. That's what I call Agile as a culture. Then, on the other hand, you have, for example, people who got their certification as a Scrum Master, and then they come back, and then they start doing Scrum. And then they start doing the planning sessions, and the retrospectives, and the demos, and they're really strict about that. I'm sure you know people like that, so like what I call the real Scrum Nazis. So there is no way to like go around the what I call the practices of Scrum or the practices of Agile, and that's like the other kind of way to look at Agile. So why is this a problem? Let's look at culture first. So there's like a troubling narrative within the Agile community that as soon as you start implementing or transforming an organization, is that the resistance that you encounter then is resistance to change. That is at least partially true, but it does not tell the entire story. There is an underlying flow in every organization or underlying problems within every organization that keeps people from changing. There are like impediments, there are barriers that keep people from actually changing. And that's what I call resistance to change. The resistance to change is not the same as resistance to Agile. So how do we solve this? At least in part, you want people, when you want people to be open to change, that you need to create an environment that allows people to be able to change. And if we start from Agile as a culture, when we start transforming an organization, we actually assume that all processes and all system changes actually naturally flow from that. So what actually happens is when you start to do a cultural change, you start informing people, they start reading or they start doing courses, they come back into the organization, they are super excited, and what happens then? They bump into a wall. The organization itself is not ready to change. What happens then is that people really start to get cynical, they start to get really, they just don't understand why their peers or why their management just doesn't get it, why Agile is so great. So what's a logical process after that is that people just go through the motions of Agile. And that's what we call cargo cult Agile. It's like a hollowed out form of Agile, where people do things in Agile, and they perhaps get results, but the value itself, the business value in the end, it's not really there. So what I'm surmising, what the basis of my argument here is that Agile as a culture, as a starting point for a transformation in the organization, is essentially flawed and is essentially not working. So that brings me to the practices. So what happens in practices is it's more or less comparable to the Agile practitioners coming back to the organization. So where you are with practices, then you send out someone to do a Scrum training. They learn the things they need to learn, they get their certification, they come back into the organization, they get support from coaches. And what we see then is that they try to like blend it into a team, and the team starts working in a Scrum-like fashion. And what we then assume that happens is that that those people and those teams start they be able to understand the impediments that prevent them from doing Agile. That's one of the reasons why Scrum is there. But also one of the things that is like a failure in Scrum in that fashion is that we start to also to go from the presumption that those teams are able to resolve these impediments, and that's simply something that is not happening. Those teams often don't have the power. They need managerial support. They need time. They need resources. But from a team perspective, they just can't scale that. They just can't get to that final result. So what this ends up in as well as from the viewpoint of Agile as a culture is that we end up doing Agile for the sake of doing Agile, or Scrum for the sake of doing Scrum. So we're like, how many minutes into this presentation? 12? We're like, okay, 12 minutes into this presentation, and things are not looking really good. So we've got 2 viewpoints from which to start our transformation, and both of them are not getting you where you want to go. So, okay, I did promise that. So what do we need now? How do we go from here? So I believe that we're missing a piece of the puzzle. And that piece of the puzzle is one additional dimension that has not been discussed here, and that is rarely being discussed. That is Agile as a structure. So what is Agile as a structure? That is, when we focus on structure, we're focusing on the team level, we're focusing on backlogs, teams, and working tested products. When we scale that up, like we saw in the previous presentation from Peter and Wouter, when we scale that up, we're talking about installing Agile structures, installing governance, and using metrics and tools. Okay, so what I'm saying is that structure is not more important than the other two. They are all equally important, but it is very important to know where to start. When we start from Agile as a culture, we assume that structure and practices will come from that. If we start from practices, we assume that the culture and the structure will come from that in a natural way. So what I'm saying here is that when we start from structure, we're like laying our foundation. And in that foundation, or if you want to call it a coat hanger, if the structure is there as a coat hanger, we can hang our practices and we can hang our culture from that, and we will see that it will come naturally. So what is the solution? The solution is structure. But what is structure? What are the details of structure? So when I talked about like key things getting hidden behind the manifesto and getting behind the practices of Scrum, I was talking about backlogs, teams, and working tested software, or working tested product if you want to go like scale it above software development. So without these 3 things, nothing you will do in Scrum or in Agile will work. So let's dive into the details of every of these three items. So let's start off with backlogs. What is a backlog? Okay, I'm not going to ask you now. I don't need to answer that. It was just teasing you. So when I talk to companies about, do you have a backlog? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, we have a backlog. And I say, okay, can you show me your backlog? And what I see then is either one or two camps is either being like a general idea of what the PO wants, really high level, not things that are like items on the backlog that are stretching sprints multiple days long and so forth. Or they are really specific, going to really into the details of, for example, really technical stuff. So these are like the two things that I'm currently seeing. But what is a good backlog? And that is like a better question. So I would like to go back to the theory of invest. I'm sure some of you already know what that letter word stands for, but I really want to stress the importance of invest in the quality of your backlog. So for those of you who don't know, invest stands for independent. So you have a user story or you have like a work item on your backlog. You can take one out, you can put another one back in. There is no interdependency between your user stories. N stands for negotiable. Things are not set in stone. You can negotiate about a topic or an item on your backlog. Valuable. Things need to have a certain value. If you have something on your backlogs that does not add any value, get them off there. It's completely not useful to have them on it. Estimatable. You need to know when you're done. If you don't know when you're done, yeah, where is the end? When does your project stop, or when can you get to a completion, when can you get to done? So then you have small. You need to be able to do the things on your backlog in 1 or 2 days. And testable. Yeah, you need to know when you're done. Estimatable, I was wrong there. Estimatable because you need to be able to put the time on every one of the items. So the thing is that only rarely do I see people building backlogs like this. And well, the problem is that in most enterprises is that things are not clear. Decision-making, rules and responsibilities, same things that Peter said in the previous presentation. When that's not clear, you don't know who needs to build the backlog, who needs to validate it, and so forth and so forth. And then we come needlessly to the second part, that's teams. That's also something that a lot of companies are getting wrong. You need to be able to have a team that is able to do everything, a cross-functional team. But how many organizations are able to get every team as a complete cross-functional team? And that's only on the team level. When you start scaling this, and you start having 400 people working across a single code base, and you need to be able to get value from your collaborative teams, then things really start to go wrong. So, in essence, what is a team? The team is an intersection between organizational, business, and technical architecture. That's what a team is. It's like a cross point. And you need to be able to touch every single bit there. So, then we come to working tested products. So, who is familiar with the definition of done? Okay, some of you are, most of you aren't. So the definition of done is nothing more than a set of rules that a team decides on when something is done. Is that clear, more or less in like high scale, what that is? So the reason why this is so important is that as a project manager in software development, I know firsthand how really tempting it is to get to a 90% done, 90% left to do kind of thing. If you know what I mean. So, for example, yes, we've coded everything, but we haven't tested it. Or, yes, we've tested everything, but we didn't get the bugs out. Or, we did get all the bugs out, but we still need to deploy it. Or the customer hasn't looked at it, or it hasn't been signed off on. There are always reasons why something is not completely done. So what happens then is as soon as you start having a situation where things are not completely done, where are only partially done, is that you start building a secret backlog in the back. And that backlog is like undetermined, undefined, and it's building somewhere in the back, and it's preventing you from reaching a final destination of success. It's setting you up for failure. So done is important in Agile. In Agile, it keeps you from ultimate chaos. Because if you don't have a good backlog, and you have teams that don't stick together, and you can't get to done, you have no idea where you are in your project. Okay? Am I correct in this? If there is any discussion, yeah, please say so, because I'm really building on this to go forward in my presentation. Okay, everyone in agreement on this? So the question you need to pose at this point is, am I covering these three bases? Am I covering my backlog, my teams, and my working tested product? Am I getting that working tested product done? So as soon as you have these three dimensions, these three elements, then Scrum and Agile start really to have meaning. So people say, okay, but we need a product owner. And I'm like, no, you really don't need a product owner. You need like a good backlog. I don't care if you have a product owner. People are like, okay, but we need a Scrum Master. At least we need a Scrum Master. No, you don't need a Scrum Master. You want to have the impediments removed from the team. And I really don't care whether that is a Scrum Master or if that's anyone else. You just need to have the team being able to get to work. So what I'm seeing in practice is that startup companies or like smaller companies are really good in getting like a natural flow in these things. The problem is in large enterprises, these things don't come naturally. You need to put effort in these things in order to reach and to get success. So I want to scale this up to, I'm going to do 4 tiers. We've like covered the basic tier of the team. So now we're coming to the second level, or the result level, is what kind of result are we getting from these 3 elements? So when we go from backlogs, what is the result of having a good backlog? And that is having clarity. So what I'm often seeing is that like a PO is like shooting general IDs to the team, and general IDs being like a bad backlog, and then the team needs to take care of its own, and they are like producing something like at their best ID that they're like implementing something. And what happens in the end? They demo it, and the product owner is really not happy. Why? Simply because he did not make his intentions clear to the team. A PO's job, or the job of the business, is to provide clarity to the team through the backlog. So the thing that Scrum and SAFe is predicated upon is the fact that teams can hold themselves accountable, and that the stakeholders or the business can hold the teams accountable. So what happens, for example, if you got a matrixed organization where like people are spread super thin across 2 or multiple teams, is that at that point in time that the teams themselves start losing faith in the essence of Agile and in the essence of Scrum, and the fact that they simply can't hold themselves accountable anymore because they are spread super thin. They need to put time in that team and time in that team, and that just is not working. So not only is having is this having an effect on your velocity? You will not be able to get to a stable velocity. But in addition, you simply cannot get to a definition of done. And as soon as you have that, then at that time, the team can't hold themselves accountable anymore, but neither can the organization. So in the end, what is the point of doing Agile then? So when I was talking about the 90% done, 90% left to do kind of thing, and the fact that we're building a secret backlog when we take partial credits, is that we stop having measurable progress. The measurable progress you get through the definition of done and through transparency is super important. It's the thing that will get you to success. And if you don't have that, then in the end you're just setting yourself up for failure. So we've got the first year with backlogs, teams, and working tested product. The second tier, the result tier, with clarity, accountability, and measurable progress. And now we're going to tie that all together to a third tier, what I call a motivational tier, and that's something that I want to link to the book Drive by Dan Pink, where he says that knowledge workers, in essence, don't need a monetary reward as a driver. They need, of course, they need to be able to pay the mortgage, take care of their family, take care of their children, etc. They need the money for that. But a financial reward system actually degrades the performance of a knowledge worker. And it actually ties like neatly together with the two previous tiers, because through the backlogs and through clarity, we are reaching purpose. So, has anyone ever seen someone with a real purpose, with a real dream, that was really vague? No, and that's simply because those people who are driven by purpose, they have a very, very clear view on what they want to achieve, and most of the time, how they want to achieve that. So, and that is what we need to be able to give to our teams through the backlog, through the fact that we are giving them clarity, is that in the end, they will get purpose from this. So, on the second, on the part of teams, accountability, now we have, as a motivational driver, we have autonomy. So autonomy actually naturally comes from accountability, and it actually blends together in like a good balance. You can't have one without the other kind of thing. You can't really be held accountable if you're not autonomous. Neither can you be really autonomous if you're not held accountable. And in the end, this all comes down to mastery on the level of working tested product and measurability. So we have that mastery. In the end, if you are doing something, you need to be able to produce something of value to reach mastery. You might fail in the meantime, you might fall down, you might get a learning curve from that, but in the end, to reach mastery, you need to be able to produce something of value. So, we've got the first and the second tier, we've tied it up to a third tier, so the team, the result, and then the motivation. And now we're going to scale that up to a fourth tier. That's a scalable tier. But in the end, and this is what I want to really focus on this slide, is that this, in essence, is what Agile is about. Agile is not only about getting agility in the organization and being more adaptable to change, but on the other hand, it's also about engaging people better. Getting the people in your organization really in a flow and in like a way of work that is better for them, and as a result is better for the organization. So, is it last year, and how much time do I have left? 10 minutes, okay. Okay, so for those of you who were present during the previous presentation, you will hear some things that are more or less comparable. So when you look at SAFe, that is scaling Scrum up to on an organizational level, but that's what we're also doing here. So Backlogs, you can scale that up, and that comes to governance. Governance in an organization, and I know it is often considered a dirty word in Agile. But what governance for me really means is, how do I make economic trade-offs in the face of scarce resources? So you need to have that thing present as soon as you start scaling up the Agile structure up onto a complete organizational program level or an initiative level. So in essence, SAFe is nothing more. It is something more, but it is, you can place that as a governance framework around Scrum. So therefore it is really important to have that present as soon as you start doing Agile above a team level in your organization. Then you have organizational structure, and that's more on how do we form teams, how do we get those 400 people working across a single code base, how do we coordinate that, how do we get them to produce something of real value without getting in each other's way, how do we make this a good running and smooth running train. And then in the end we have metrics and tools, and that's the working tested product at scale. We need to be able to measure progress. We need to be able to control the progress of things within the organization. We need to be able to have proof on what we are doing is adding value and has an economic base. So that brings this all together. Our 4 tiers: backlog teams, working tested product, clarity, accountability, measurable progress, purpose, autonomy, mastery, and governance, organizational structure, and metrics and tools. This is the complete picture I can give you around Agile as a structure, as a basis for your transformation. So what is really interesting is that as soon as you start implementing this, that there's one thing left that gets in the way of reaching actual agility, and that is dependencies. So who has dependencies in their organization? I see only a few hands come up. Everyone has dependencies in their organization, unless you're doing really trivial things, but I would assume that you're not doing that. Okay. So I will give you some examples on dependencies here, but actually it's somewhat beyond the purview of this presentation to really go in depth into this. But we have, for example, you have technical debt and defects, you have matrix organizations, what we talked about earlier this presentation, and for example, we have limited access to subject matter expertise. Those are one of the few things that are, like, generally speaking, that you can see in most organizations. Those are elements or dependencies that are really frequently seen. So if you want to know more about this or about anything, just talk to me after this presentation, and I can give you some insights on that as well. So to summarize, I'm going to quickly go through this again. So we started from the assumption that Agile as a culture and Agile as practices are simply not cutting it. When we are starting from those two viewpoints, we're like missing something. We are setting ourselves up for failure. So we introduced Agile as a structure, as a way to prevent that, as a way to counter actually those fail modes. So what was Agile as a structure? Again, we have first you read backlog teams and working tested product, clarity, accountability, and measurable progress on the results tier. We have purpose, autonomy, and mastery on the motivational tier. And in the end, on the scaled level, it comes back to governance, organizational structure, and metrics and tools. So when you have this in place, you have a far better chance to reach true agility in your organization, to get you to an adaptable state where you can really, when the market demands something from you, then you can really act upon that. The only thing that is left for you to do is, when you encounter dependencies, to be really, really careful, take your time, put in the resources, put in the managerial support to get them away. And with those two things, with that recipe, you are setting yourself up for true agility. And I wish you the very best of luck in doing that. Oh, sorry. Thank you.